Camille Harris is a single mother and waitress who's barely holding it together until one night, a man in a tailored suit walks into her diner and offers her a deal that sounds more like a trap than a rescue. Dante Moretti, Chicago's most feared mafia boss, doesn't believe in love. Camille doesn't believe in second chances, but pretending to be his fiancée might be the only way to save her daughter's life. What starts as a cold transaction turns into something dangerously real. And in a world ruled by crime, loyalty, and secrets, falling in love might be the most dangerous thing of all. Stay with us, because this isn't just a love story. It's survival, sacrifice, and everything in between. Camille Harris wiped her brow with the back of her wrist, then tossed her stained apron onto the counter with a sigh that felt like it carried the weight of the world. It was nearly midnight, and the last customer had finally left the worn-down diner that clung to the edge of Southside Chicago like a forgotten memory. Her legs ached, her lower back screamed, and her eyes burned from lack of sleep. She moved behind the counter and began sorting the receipts, mentally calculating tips and counting change, her brain clicking into finance mode as it always did once the noise faded. She didn't notice the man still sitting in the back booth, half shrouded in shadow, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She only noticed him when he cleared his throat softly and said, "You're good with numbers." Camille looked up, startled. The man had barely spoken since he ordered black coffee 2 hours ago, hadn't even touched the pie. "Excuse me," she said, cautious. He leaned forward, letting the dim light catch his features, sharp, clean, commanding, expensive suit, eyes like frozen steel. He didn't belong here. "You corrected the order total by memory twice. Most people would have missed that." Camille crossed her arms, defensive. "Is that why you've been watching me? Because I can do math?" He smiled without humor. "Because I'm looking for someone who can play a part. Someone who can look convincing when needed." She tilted her head, skeptical. "What kind of part?" That's when he said it, so casually it almost didn't register. "Pretend to be my fiancé. Just for a night. You'll be compensated generously." Her lips parted in disbelief. She stared at him, stunned for a second, then let out a short, incredulous laugh. "That's a joke, right?" He didn't blink. "I don't joke." Camille stepped back a little. "So, let me get this straight. You walk in here, say barely a word all night, and then ask me, a total stranger, to fake being your fiancé." She shook her head. "You think because I'm wearing a cheap uniform and pouring coffee for minimum wage, I'd be desperate enough to say yes?" The words had bite, but her voice trembled slightly. He studied her for a long beat. "I didn't mean offense. I meant opportunity." Camille scoffed. "Opportunity for what? A scam? A con? Who even are you?" There was a pause before he replied, quiet but loaded. "Dante Moretti." The name hung in the air like a secret. Her stomach dropped. She'd heard that name before. Everyone had. Her breath caught. Dante Moretti, the ghost behind half the city's headlines. The name whispered in alleys, written in the margins of criminal reports, tied to luxury buildings and missing people. Camille's instinct screamed to walk away. But instead, she asked, because she was Camille, because she always needed to know what game was being played. "Why me?" He didn't flinch. "You're discreet, you're sharp, and you're invisible to the world. That's exactly what I need." Her jaw clenched. "Then find someone else. I'm not for sale." She turned away, gathering the receipts with more force than needed. "I have a daughter," she muttered under her breath. It wasn't meant for him, but he caught it. "A daughter?" he asked, his voice softer now. She froze. "What's wrong with her?" She didn't answer. "How old?" he pressed. Camille turned back, arms crossed. "7, her name's Maya, and she's not your concern." That was when everything shifted. Dante's eyes narrowed slightly, but it wasn't judgment, it was calculation. "What if I could help?" he asked. She narrowed her eyes. "Help how?" He opened a small leather folder he'd pulled from his coat and slid a piece of paper toward her. A figure. Large. Enough for months of medical care, and maybe more. This would be yours, not for one night, for a contract, a few weeks. You'll wear a ring, attend dinners, smile for cameras. That's all. She stared at the paper, then at him. You're serious. Deadly, he said. Why would a man like you need a fake fiancée? She asked. His jaw flexed. To protect what's mine. It wasn't a full answer, but it was the only one she'd get. Camille glanced at the clock. Past midnight. She thought of Mia, of the bills, of the envelope she hadn't opened today. No touching. No funny business, she said flatly. Of course. And you pay up front. Dante nodded once, pulling out a black card. Camille held his gaze for a long, taut moment. Something told her she'd regret this. Everything about him screamed danger, a man with blood under his fingernails and power that never asked, only commanded. But her daughter needed more than pride could give. She slowly reached out and took the card, her fingers brushing his just briefly. Fine, she whispered. But the second this turns into something I didn't agree to, I walk. He nodded again, more solemnly this time. Understood. And just like that, the deal was made. A waitress turned into a fiancée. A mother crossed a line she swore she never would. Camille Harris didn't know it yet, but this midnight agreement wasn't just a contract. It was the start of a storm, one that neither of them could control. Camille stood frozen in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection of a woman she barely recognized. The cheap ponytail and diner apron had been replaced with a sleek, low bun and a midnight black designer dress that clung to her figure like it had been sewn just for her. The necklace, diamonds, real ones, shimmered against her skin. Her heels were taller than anything she'd worn before, and every step made her feel like she might either conquer the world or fall flat on her face. She wasn't sure which. Behind her, Dante gave a curt nod of approval. You clean up well, he said, like it was a business fact, not a compliment. You could try sounding less surprised, she muttered. Don't mistake this for flattery, he replied, adjusting his cufflinks. Tonight, you're not Camille the waitress. You're Camille Moretti, my fiancée. Smile when needed, speak when spoken to, and remember the rules. Camille turned to face him, arms folded. Right. The Holy Trinity. No questions, no touching, no feelings. He gave a tight smile. Exactly. Do that, and you'll be safe. They entered the Lion's Den together. A gathering of Chicago's underground elite, business tycoons with blood on their balance sheets, politicians in tailored suits hiding stained morals, and mob families with histories older than the skyline. Camille felt their eyes on her the moment she stepped in. Some were curious, others skeptical, a few were outright hostile. One woman whispered something behind a champagne flute, and a man laughed. Camille's spine straightened. She knew how to read a room, and this one screamed danger disguised as elegance. Dante walked beside her, stoic, unreadable. His hand hovered near the small of her back but never touched, a silent assertion of possession without intimacy. They're testing you, he said out of the corner of his mouth. You're the outsider. Make them think you belong or they'll eat you alive. Camille nodded once. Let them try. Back at his penthouse later that night, the silence between them was sharp. Camille unpinned her hair and placed the borrowed jewelry back into a velvet box. So this is what your world looks like, she said, a lot of smiles with knives behind them. Dante loosened his tie but didn't respond. They think I'm a liability, don't they, she added. They think I'll mess things up. He finally met her eyes. They think I'm distracted. Camille blinked. Are you? His gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary. No, he said, but it lacked conviction. She let it hang in the air and walked over to the desk, where a stack of financial reports sat untouched. Your accounts are a mess, she said, flipping through the ledgers. Half your businesses are laundering cash through different shell core. But the math doesn't add up. You're bleeding money from 3 fronts. Dante frowned. You read all that in one glance? I was a finance major before Maya got sick. He said nothing. She added softly, You want me to play fiancé? Then let me be useful. In the days that followed, Camille slipped deeper into the role. She wore designer dresses, attended Dante's meetings, and learned how to nod with the confidence of someone born into wealth. But behind closed doors, she worked through his books with quiet efficiency. What started as pretend quickly became something more functional. She wasn't just a prop, she was solving problems no one else dared point out. She challenged him, and to her surprise, he didn't shut her down. Instead, he listened. Sometimes they argued about risk exposure, about trust, about power, but those arguments sharpened a strange respect between them. And sometimes, late at night, when the suits and jewelry were off and only truth remained, they sat at opposite ends of the couch in silence. He'd pour a glass of whiskey, she'd sip tea, and between them, something unspoken settled. Not comfort, not yet, but curiosity. One evening, as she explained how a fake import company had siphoned off nearly $400,000, Dante interrupted her mid-sentence. Why are you really doing this? He asked. You've already got your daughter's treatment covered. You could leave. Camille paused. Because walking away now feels like unfinished business. He leaned back, studying her like a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. You know this isn't a game, right? He said. People in this world, they don't just hurt you. They erase you. She held his gaze. I've been erased before. At least this time I get to choose why. His lips twitched, not quite a smile. Then he turned back to the reports. Finish explaining the offshore transfers, he said. And just like that, the wall stayed up. But there was a crack in it now. Camille had stepped into this role as a survival tactic, as a mother with no other options. But now she was in meetings, calculating risks, analyzing numbers, and watching Dante closely. He wasn't just a mob boss with a temper and a terrifying reputation. He was precise, strategic, and deeply painfully alone. And though the rules were clear, no questions, no touching, no feelings, the tension in the air said otherwise. She couldn't unsee the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. And he couldn't ignore the way she fit into his world, not like an outsider, but like someone who'd always belonged. For now, though, they said nothing, only worked, only watched, and continued pretending. Camille stood frozen in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection of a woman she barely recognized. The cheap ponytail and diner apron had been replaced with a sleek, low bun and a midnight black designer dress that clung to her figure like it had been sewn just for her. The necklace, diamonds, real ones, shimmered against her skin. Her heels were taller than anything she'd worn before, and every step made her feel like she might either conquer the world or fall flat on her face. She wasn't sure which. Behind her, Dante gave a curt nod of approval. You clean up well, he said, like it was a business fact, not a compliment. You could try sounding less surprised, she muttered. Don't mistake this for flattery, he replied, adjusting his cufflinks. Tonight, you're not Camille the waitress. You're Camille Moretti, my fiancée. Smile when needed, speak when spoken to, and remember the rules. Camille turned to face him, arms folded. Right. The Holy Trinity. No questions, no touching, no feelings. He gave a tight smile. Exactly. Do that, and you'll be safe. They entered the Lion's Den together. A gathering of Chicago's underground elite, business tycoons with blood on their balance sheets, politicians in tailored suits hiding stained morals, and mob families with histories older than the skyline. Camille felt their eyes on her the moment she stepped in. Some were curious, others skeptical, a few were outright hostile. One woman whispered something behind a champagne flute, and a man laughed. Camille's spine straightened. She knew how to read a room, and this one screamed danger disguised as elegance. Dante walked beside her, stoic, unreadable. His hand hovered near the small of her back, but never touched. A silent assertion of possession without intimacy. "They're testing you," he said out of the corner of his mouth. "You're the outsider. Make them think you belong, or they'll eat you alive." Camille nodded once. Let them try. Back at his penthouse later that night, the silence between them was sharp. Camille unpinned her hair and placed the borrowed jewelry back into a velvet box. "So this is what your world looks like," she said. "A lot of smiles with knives behind them." Dante loosened his tie but didn't respond. "They think I'm a liability, don't they?" she added. "They think I'll mess things up." He finally met her eyes. "They think I'm distracted." Camille blinked. "Are you?" His gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary. "No," he said, but it lacked conviction. She let it hang in the air and walked over to the desk, where a stack of financial reports sat untouched. "Your accounts are a mess," she said, flipping through the ledgers. "Half your businesses are laundering cash through different shell core, but the math doesn't add up. You're bleeding money from 3 fronts." Dante frowned. "You read all that in one glance?" "I was a finance major before Maya got sick." He said nothing. She added softly, "You want me to play Fiancée? Then let me be useful." In the days that followed, Camille slipped deeper into the role. She wore designer dresses, attended Dante's meetings, and learned how to nod with the confidence of someone born into wealth. But behind closed doors, she worked through his books with quiet efficiency. What started as pretend quickly became something more functional. She wasn't just a prop, she was solving problems no one else dared point out. She challenged him, and to her surprise, he didn't shut her down. Instead, he listened. Sometimes they argued about risk exposure, about trust, about power, but those arguments sharpened a strange respect between them. And sometimes, late at night, when the suits and jewelry were off and only truth remained, they sat at opposite ends of the couch in silence. He'd pour a glass of whiskey, she'd sip tea, and between them, something unspoken settled. Not comfort, not yet, but curiosity. One evening, as she explained how a fake import company had siphoned off nearly $400,000, Dante interrupted her mid-sentence. "Why are you really doing this?" he asked. "You've already got your daughter's treatment covered. You could leave." Camille paused. "Because walking away now feels like unfinished business." He leaned back, studying her like a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. "You know this isn't a game, right?" he said. "People in this world, they don't just hurt you. They erase you." She held his gaze. "I've been erased before. At least this time I get to choose why." His lips twitched, not quite a smile. Then he turned back to the reports. "Finish explaining the offshore transfers," he said. And just like that, the wall stayed up. But there was a crack in it now. Camille had stepped into this role as a survival tactic, as a mother with no other options. But now she was in meetings, calculating risks, analyzing numbers, and watching Dante closely. He wasn't just a mob boss with a temper and a terrifying reputation. He was precise, strategic, and deeply painfully alone. And though the rules were clear, no questions, no touching, no feelings, the tension in the air said otherwise. She couldn't unsee the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. And he couldn't ignore the way she fit into his world, not like an outsider, but like someone who'd always belonged. For now, though, they said nothing, only worked, only watched, and continued pretending. Camille had faced a lot of intimidating people in her life. Landlords with ultimatums, doctors delivering news no mother wants to hear, and creditors with fake sympathy. But nothing compared to sitting across from Alessandra Moretti. The matriarch of the Moretti Empire exuded a power that made even hardened criminals choose their words carefully. Her silver hair was twisted in an elegant knot, and her sharp eyes missed nothing. Camille sat beside Dante at the long dining table, surrounded by members of his inner circle. Some she recognized from whispered names in the books she'd cleaned up. Others were new, cousins, underbosses, men who smiled without warmth and drank too little to be drunk. Camille tried to hold her fork steadily, but every gesture felt watched, every movement calculated. Dante leaned toward her, his voice low. Eat. Smile. Don't let them see nerves. This isn't dinner. It's inspection. She gave a half smile. Nice of you to mention that after we sat down. His lips curved almost into a grin, but Alessandra's voice cut across the table. Camille, dear, tell me, how did you and my son meet? The room quieted just a beat too long. Camille felt all eyes on her. She took a breath, remembering Dante's coaching. Stick to the lie. Keep it simple. I spilled coffee on his shoes, she began, eliciting a polite chuckle from a few. I was mortified, but he wasn't angry. He smiled and offered to pay for my lunch. I told him he could buy me a new pair of shoes instead. That's how it started. Alessandra tilted her head. How quaint. Most women would have walked away in shame. Camille met her gaze. Most women don't have kids to feed. Pride is expensive. The table shifted, small murmurs echoing her boldness. Dante's fingers tapped under the table, a subtle sign of approval. Alessandra smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. A mother, too. How noble. She reached into a small velvet pouch and placed something on the table, a ring, old and heavy with age. This belonged to my husband's mother, passed through generations of women who understood loyalty. Camille stared at it, unsure of the meaning. Alessandra continued, voice like ice. If you can't hold a lie in your eyes, don't wear it on your finger. Silence. Camille felt her throat close slightly as she reached for the ring. Her hand trembled, not from fear, but from something else. Shame. Doubt. She couldn't tell. She met Alessandra's gaze and slid the ring onto her finger. It was too big, cold, unfamiliar. I'm not afraid of heavy things, she said, voice clear. I've carried worse. Alessandra said nothing more, just sipped her wine. But Camille knew she had been weighed, measured. She glanced at Dante, hoping for a signal, a lifeline, but he was looking at her differently now. Like he was seeing something he hadn't expected, not just a woman surviving, but one confronting a lioness without flinching. Later, as they stepped away from the table, Dante whispered, "That was suicide or genius. I haven't decided yet." Camille exhaled. "Welcome to my whole life." They returned to the penthouse in near silence. Camille slipped off her heels, tossed the velvet ring box on the coffee table, and dropped onto the couch like the night had physically hit her. "Your mother hates me," she said bluntly. Dante poured himself a drink. "She hates everyone until they prove they won't crumble." He handed her a glass of water. "Tonight, you didn't." Camille took it, rubbing her thumb along the rim. "That ring, did she plan that?" He nodded. "She was testing your spine. The ring was hers once. She wore it the night she made my father give up his mistress," Camille scoffed. "And now, I'm playing the loyal fiancée in front of people who'd bury me in a heartbeat if I slipped." Dante sat beside her, his tone quieter. "You're doing more than playing." She turned to him. "What's that supposed to mean?" He didn't answer, just looked at her like he was searching for the line he shouldn't cross. As days passed, something began to shift. Camille still signed fake signatures and smiled through lies, but her heart wasn't as shielded. She found herself watching Dante when he wasn't looking, noticing the way he only truly relaxed around his dog, or how he stayed up late reading ledgers she'd already fixed. She saw the pressure he bore in silence, the weight of men who feared him, and a family that used him. And he, in turn, started listening when she spoke, really listening, not just tolerating her. Once, in a meeting, she corrected a mistake in a partner's numbers, and Dante backed her publicly. That had never happened before. He was letting her in, piece by piece. But it wasn't trust. Not yet. It was something quieter, more dangerous. Familiarity, the kind that broke walls down without warning. Still, that night at the dinner table lingered in her mind. Alessandra's cold smile, the weight of the ring, the unspoken threat beneath every word. Camille had walked into this pretending to be someone she wasn't, but now she wasn't sure who she was becoming. She wasn't just wearing borrowed diamonds anymore. She was starting to believe she had a place in this twisted empire. And that was more terrifying than any threat Alessandra could make. As she stood in front of the mirror later that evening, the ring still heavy on her hand, she whispered to her reflection, "If I can't hold the lie in my eyes, I shouldn't wear it." But the truth was, the lie didn't feel like a lie anymore. Not entirely. Camille never imagined she'd live in a mansion that had its own elevator. The place Dante moved her into was one of his smaller properties, according to him, a safe house, though nothing about it felt small or temporary. Marble floors, high ceilings, and rooms so quiet they felt like cathedrals. "If we're going to sell this story, people need to believe you actually live with me," Dante had said, barely glancing up from his espresso. And so, she packed the essentials, clothes, her daughter's photo, the pink teddy bear Mia had held through chemo, and entered a house that didn't feel like hers. The first few days were strange. They barely spoke unless it was about schedules or reports. Camille worked at the long dining table, organizing stacks of ledgers, flagged receipts, and handwritten notes she found stuffed into desk drawers. Dante kept to his study or vanished entirely. But every night there were signs. A mug of chamomile left beside her laptop. A legal pad with his slanted handwriting noting, "You were right about the Morelli numbers. Good catch." They didn't say thank you. They didn't touch. But something unspoken was beginning to take root in the stillness. By the end of the first week, Camille had rearranged his entire financial record system. She didn't ask for permission. She just did it. Dante didn't complain. He simply walked into the room one evening, scanned the new filing logic and said, "This is cleaner." That was all. But the next morning, she found a hardcover book, Principles of Forensic Accounting, on her side of the table with a post-it. "Figured you'd like this." It wasn't a gesture meant to impress. It was something else. Respect, maybe, or curiosity. In turn, Camille began to notice things about him, the way he skimmed documents in a pattern, always starting at the bottom, how he cracked his knuckles twice before dialing into calls, that he never slept before 3 a.m. Once she found him in the kitchen at midnight, pouring whiskey over ice and rereading a legal contract like it held secrets. "Why do you do it all yourself?" she asked, uninvited. He didn't look up. "Because every man I trusted once made me pay for it." That was the end of the conversation. But the next morning, there was an extra cup of coffee waiting for her, black the way she drank it. No words, just heat and steam and an acknowledgement that lingered. Their silence wasn't awkward anymore. It had shape, meaning. It filled the air between them like the rhythm of a song only they could hear. Dante didn't like chatter, and Camille had learned to value the clarity of quiet. Still, the absence of touch, of anything intimate, felt deliberate. He never brushed past her unnecessarily. When they sat together, they left space, yet that distance began to pulse with something heavier. One morning, she reached to grab a paperclip, and her fingers grazed his. Neither of them flinched, but both paused. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second too long. No words were spoken, but for the rest of the day, she felt the echo of that touch, and he didn't leave the room once while she worked. Camille began writing him notes. Nothing emotional, just suggestions, corrections, reminders, short sentences on yellow sticky pads. Need to revisit supplier contracts. Overpayment to Bellini Group, see page 12. She never signed them, but he knew they were hers. In return, he left his own cryptic marks, a checkmark next to her margins, a dot beside things she should look at again. Once she found an envelope with her name on it and $1,000 inside, labeled, "For Mia, no questions." She didn't take the money at first, but he placed it in her drawer later anyway, without a word. That night she stared at it for hours. It wasn't charity, it wasn't guilt. It was a line being drawn in the dust between them, and neither of them dared cross it yet. The house was massive, but they lived in just a few shared rooms, like orbiting planets finding the same loop. She'd fall asleep sometimes on the sofa with reports scattered over her, and he'd cover her with a blanket but never wake her. One evening, as she read at the kitchen counter, he walked in and asked, "Do you miss it?" She looked up. "What?" "The normal stuff. Coffee shops, mornings with your kid, not playing dress-up for killers." Camille smiled without humor. "Every second, but this gets her medicine, and you get..." "What?" "A show." Dante looked at her for a long time. "I get not being alone in this place. That counts." It was the closest either of them had come to honesty, and it left them both shaken in a way that didn't need shouting or tears. By the third week, routine had become ritual. She could predict his moods by the way he flipped his pen. He could tell when she was lying just by how she exhaled. There were still no touches, still no words about what this all meant, but their silence had grown roots, deep ones. She felt them every time he sat beside her without speaking, or when she left him a note and he responded not with words, but action. Something was cracking beneath the surface of their agreement. Camille wasn't sure if it was longing or danger, but she knew it was real. And as she folded a final report and left it on his desk that night, she realized the contract might still be fake, but the silence they shared had become something frighteningly real. Camille first noticed it on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of day where routine had started to feel safe, maybe too safe. She was leaving the clinic after Mia's latest checkup, clutching her daughter's new prescription, and a tired sigh when something pricked her instincts. A black SUV parked across the street, tinted windows, engines still running. She paused, turned her head slowly, and pretended to check her phone. The vehicle didn't move, but she saw the glint of a cigarette ember flicker through the glass. Someone was watching. That night she told herself it was just paranoia. Maybe she was overthinking it. But 2 days later, while taking a cab to meet Dante at a warehouse deal, she saw the same car again. Different license plate. Same make. Same lingering feeling of being hunted. She didn't tell Dante right away. Part of her didn't want to admit that she had become more than a prop in his life, that the spotlight had moved and someone else was now scripting danger for her. It was during a rare dinner between them, plates pushed aside and papers forgotten, that Camille finally said it. "I think someone's following me." Dante's fork froze mid-air. He didn't speak immediately, just stared at her with a look she couldn't read, something between fear and fury. "Describe the car," he said. She did. He rose from the table, pulled out his phone, and left the room without another word. That night, Camille found 2 new men outside her building, silent, heavily built, nodding once when she passed. Protection, not comfort. When Dante returned later, he looked colder, harder. "Tony Delgado," he said. "He knows who you are now, not just the face, everything." Camille's chest tightened. "Why would he care about me?" Dante didn't answer. He just stared at her like she had become a chess piece he hadn't planned for. But underneath the silence was something deeper, something that wasn't strategy or anger. It was fear, not for himself, for her. Tony Delgado was infamous for targeting pressure points. He didn't attack the fortress. He made it crumble from the inside. Camille had read enough news, heard enough whispered stories at those Mafia dinners to understand the weight of that name. She also knew what it meant to be a weakness. Her being with Dante was no longer just an arrangement. She wasn't just a pretend fiancée. She had become leverage. She began altering her routes, memorizing license plates, carrying pepper spray in her purse like it would stop the kind of men Dante dealt with. But even that didn't keep the dread at bay. It was one thing to lie for money, it was another to live every day as bait. When Mia's school called to say a man had asked about pickup times, Camille nearly collapsed. She screamed through the phone to have security tightened. Then she called Dante, her voice trembling. He arrived 10 minutes later in person, face pale with rage. "You're moving into the penthouse now," he ordered. "I don't care if it makes the lie harder. You and your daughter are never unprotected again." That night in the penthouse, Camille finally snapped. "What is this, Dante?" she shouted, her voice hoarse. "This wasn't part of the deal. I didn't sign up to be used as your liability." He turned to her, expression unreadable. "You're not a liability," he said quietly. "You're the only thing I can't control, and that terrifies me." She didn't know how to respond to that. No words felt safe anymore. She wanted to scream, to run, but also somehow to stay. Because beneath the chaos, something else had begun to settle. Something fragile, like trust or maybe attachment. She hated that part the most, not because it was unwanted, but because it made her weak, vulnerable. Exactly what Tony Delgado counted on. Exactly what Dante feared. And now, so did she. Camille started sleeping lightly, jumping at every creak. She installed new locks, learned self-defense basics in secret, and kept her phone charged obsessively. But something deeper shifted too. She began to understand the kind of pressure Dante lived under. The quiet calculation behind every move, the isolation behind every powerful decision. She stopped seeing him as just a mafia boss with rules. She started seeing the man who had too much to lose, but nothing he trusted enough to keep. And when he held Mia one night, awkward, unsure, but gentle, Camille felt something break inside her. This wasn't pretend anymore. Not for her. And the more she feared for his safety, the harder it became to remember that she was just supposed to be acting. By the end of the week, she had stopped correcting people when they called her Mrs. Moretti. It was easier than explaining the truth. And truth, she realized, had become a dangerous thing. She no longer feared just being exposed. She feared losing what this had accidentally become. Dante, who once barked orders, now lingered longer in rooms she entered. His glances were heavier, protective, not possessive. When Camille looked at him, she no longer saw a paycheck. She saw a man who had let her inside a world no one else was allowed to see, but that world had enemies, real ones. And now, one of them had her name on his list. The act had turned deadly, and Camille wasn't sure if her heart or her life could survive what came next. The rehearsals for the annual syndicate gala were always theatrical, a charade of unity among families who'd gladly slit each other's throats if it weren't for the constant balance of power. Camille had learned to navigate these circles with quiet grace, wearing custom dresses tailored for her new role and shoes that hurt more than the lies she wore. But nothing could prepare her for what Dante whispered in her ear just minutes before they stepped into the grand hall for rehearsal. "We have to kiss," he said, tone low and unreadable. "A real one, in front of everyone." She blinked, her heart skipping. "Is that necessary?" He met her gaze for a beat too long. "They're watching, all of them. Delgado, his lieutenants, my uncles. If it looks even slightly staged, we both become targets." Camille swallowed hard. She didn't respond. She just nodded and walked beside him, heart thudding, unsure if it was fear or something far more dangerous making her chest tight. As they stood near the faux altar set up for the rehearsal ceremony, a symbolic engagement blessing for the Moretti heir and his soon-to-be bride, Camille forced her breathing to slow. Her fingers were ice-cold, even as Dante's hand closed over hers, with a steadiness that betrayed none of the inner storm he must have felt. The moment was coming. Eyes were on them. She could feel the weight of the gazes, calculating, judging, waiting. Dante stepped closer, a hand cupping her jaw with maddening gentleness, and then he kissed her. It started like a whisper, a soft brush of lips. But then something shifted. His grip tightened slightly, her body leaned forward, and her fingers, traitorous and unsure, curled around his jacket lapel. What was supposed to be brief turned lingering, the kind of kiss that doesn't just deceive, it confesses, and in that moment, both of them forgot there were witnesses. The silence that followed was louder than applause. Camille stepped back, her eyes locked with Dante's, chest rising and falling like she'd run a mile. He looked shaken, not by fear, but by something far more dangerous: recognition. He had felt it too, the hesitation in breaking away, the lingering breath after the kiss, the ache in letting go. Around them, the men and women in suits and diamonds tried to pretend nothing had happened, but the sharpest among them, especially Delgado, were already exchanging glances. Dante cleared his throat, adjusted his cuff, and forced a smile. "Just making sure we get it right," he said lightly. The room chuckled, but Camille could feel it. The eyes, the whispers, the shifted tension in the air. She hadn't just kissed a mob boss. She had broken the one rule that mattered: don't let it feel real. Later, in a private corridor, Dante didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Camille leaned against the wall, breath shallow, voice barely audible. That wasn't part of the script. He stared at her, jaw tense, hands shoved in his pockets. "No," he said finally. It wasn't. There was a pause, heavy, pressurized. She wanted to ask what it meant, but the look in his eyes told her even he didn't know. "You didn't pull away," she whispered, as if accusing him. He stepped closer, inches from her, voice rough. "Neither did you." And that was it. That was the line neither of them had the courage to cross, nor the power to erase. The walls between them weren't just cracking, they were crumbling, and if they fell completely, the entire arrangement would collapse with it. Camille couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt his lips again. Not just the sensation, but the truth buried in them. She had kissed him before, on command, in public, as part of the play. But this was the first time she felt seen, wanted, not like a pawn, not like a role, but like a woman. And it terrified her. She had worked so hard to keep the lines clear. Dante was danger incarnate. He was a loaded weapon dressed in charm and tailored suits. She was just a mother trying to survive. But the kiss, it changed something fundamental. Because now, when she thought of him, her chest didn't just flutter, it ached, and that was far more dangerous than any enemy lurking in the shadows. By the time morning came, they hadn't spoken. Not a word. Camille kept her distance during breakfast, eyes glued to a financial report she wasn't even processing. Dante, ever composed, didn't mention it either. But the silence between them wasn't hollow anymore. It was charged. Like a room filled with invisible wires waiting to spark, and they both knew that what had happened wasn't just a misstep in their act. It was a turning point. One kiss. That's all it took to unravel a contract built on control. In front of allies and enemies alike, something real had emerged. And in their world, real was the most dangerous thing of all. The grand ballroom of the Moretti estate buzzed with luxury and danger in equal measure. Chandeliers sparkled above heads filled with secrets, and champagne flutes clinked in toasts that carried hidden agendas. Camille stood at Dante's side in a gown worth more than her annual income before all this began, her fingers trembling slightly as she held her glass. The gala was supposed to be the crowning event, a show of unity, loyalty, and strength. Dante had warned her there would be eyes, whispers, even subtle tests. But what no one anticipated was Tony Delgado's dramatic entrance. He didn't come in guns blazing. No, Tony was too calculated for that. He moved through the room like a shark smelling blood. And when his eyes landed on Camille, there was no mistaking the smile of a man who thought he'd just checkmated his enemy. Moments later, he approached the stage, a folder in hand, and nodded to the band to stop playing. "Before we toast the happy couple," he said with a smirk, "there's something the room deserves to hear." Camille's heart froze. Dante's hand tensed at the small of her back. The folder Tony held was no bluff. She could see her own signature on one of the printed pages, her contract, the one she'd signed in desperation, trading pride for survival. Tony was about to expose it all. The silence spread across the room like a virus. Some guests leaned forward with morbid curiosity. Others exchanged wary glances. Dante looked ready to intervene, but Camille stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble as if powered by something beyond fear. "Let me speak," she said, loud enough to stop the murmurs. Tony raised an eyebrow, pleased, and stepped aside. Dante didn't stop her. He didn't have to. Her voice was steady when she reached for the microphone. "What you're about to hear isn't blackmail," she said. "It's a confession." The air in the room shifted instantly. Camille inhaled, then exhaled everything she'd held back since the first night Dante Moretti walked into her diner. "I was a waitress," she began, "and a mother with hospital bills I couldn't pay. I was offered a deal, to pretend to be a fiancée, to help maintain an image, to be a part of something that never felt like mine." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I agreed for money, for security, not for love. Not..." Gasps fluttered through the room like wings. "But what wasn't in that contract," she continued, "was the way he started leaving books by my bedside. The way he listened, really listened, when no one else ever did. The way silence became our language, and then our comfort. What wasn't in the deal was how I fell in love with a man I was never supposed to even touch." A raw honesty coated every syllable. "I don't care if this ruins everything. I'd rather lose it all than live behind a lie. And if you want to call me weak for that, fine. But at least I'm not hiding behind a contract anymore." She stepped back, her chest heaving. The crowd was frozen. Even Tony looked briefly thrown, as if her boldness had sucked the venom out of his plan. No one spoke. Then Dante moved, slowly, deliberately. He approached her without a word, and for a moment, it wasn't clear what he would do. But then his hand reached for her cheek, and he pulled her into a kiss, not one meant to convince or distract or perform. It was full of weight, promise, and something achingly real. The kiss didn't just silence the room, it redefined it. The Mafia respected strength, yes, but they revered authenticity, and what had just happened was more powerful than any bullet Dante could have fired in retaliation. When they broke apart, Camille saw it, the shift in the eyes around her, the understanding, the respect. She wasn't just a prop anymore. She was something they recognized, one of their own, forged not by violence, but by brutal honesty. People began to nod subtly. Toasts were quietly raised, this time not out of obligation, but out of acknowledgement. The atmosphere didn't exactly soften. This was still a room full of criminals, but there was a new current running through it. Camille had done something few dared. She had bared her truth without permission or protection. Even Dante seemed altered by the moment, no longer the untouchable kingpin, but a man standing next to a woman who had just risked everything without blinking. When Delgado tried to slink away unnoticed, one of Dante's men intercepted him. He wouldn't be making a second move tonight. The message was clear. Power didn't lie in secrets anymore, but in those willing to burn them down in front of everyone. Camille stood in place, the microphone no longer in her hand, but her voice still ringing in everyone's ears. Dante didn't move away from her. His hand stayed at the small of her back, not as a prop, but as an anchor. For the first time since this whole facade began, Camille didn't feel like she was acting. She wasn't part of someone else's world anymore. She had carved a space in it, loudly, publicly, and irrevocably. The price of honesty might still come. There could be consequences, whispers, risks. But at that moment, she didn't regret a single word. She met Dante's eyes, and without speaking, they both understood. The lie had ended, but something far more dangerous had just begun. As the gala continued cautiously around them, Camille and Dante remained still in their truth. No one else spoke of the contract again. Tony had been silenced without a shot fired, and though neither of them said it aloud, the entire room had witnessed the same moment. The kiss, the confession, the silence that followed. Camille had broken the code, and in doing so became something no contract could fabricate. By the end of the night, she had not only told the truth, she had made them all believe in it. And Dante sealed it with a kiss in front of everyone, as if making a vow no one would dare challenge again. The decision to eliminate Tony Delgado came swiftly after the gala, executed not with chaos, but with the precision that only Dante Moretti's empire could command. The order didn't come from rage, it came from necessity. A threat like Tony, once exposed, had no place left to hide among snakes who knew the scent of weakness. Word spread quickly across Chicago's underworld. Dante had protected what was his. And by his, no one was just referring to territory or money. They were talking about Camille. The woman who once poured coffee and balanced tips was now untouchable. It wasn't just the fall of Tony that shocked the family, it was what followed. At the next Moretti gathering, amidst a silent room filled with tradition and sharp eyes, the ironclad matriarch of the family, Dante's grandmother, feared even more than some capos, approached Camille. No cold tests, no riddles wrapped in venom, just a single glance, a nod, and then a smile. Her first. "It seems," the old woman said softly, "you didn't just survive this world, you reshaped it." That smile meant everything. More than money, more than victory. It was recognition. And for Camille, it felt like being handed the final key to a kingdom she never intended to enter. Later that night, Dante took Camille to the rooftop of their building. No guards, no suits, just them. The city stretched out beneath them like a battlefield they'd both conquered in different ways. She wore no gown, just a soft blouse and jeans, but he looked at her like she was royalty. He didn't say much at first. He never did when it mattered most. Then he pulled the velvet box from his coat pocket. The same box she had once seen in his hand, holding a ring meant only for show. But this time, when he opened it, the diamond gleamed with truth. "No contract," he said. "No conditions, just me, asking you to be mine for real." Camille stared at it, not because she hadn't imagined the moment, but because she had never believed it would feel so raw, so real. "And if I say no?" she teased, a smile tugging at her lips. "I'll keep asking," he replied, smirking. "Every night, every year, for the rest of your life." Her laugh broke the tension, but her eyes shimmered with emotion. She said yes, not in a whisper, not in shock, but with full, deliberate certainty. Because love wasn't the prize, it was the legacy. A year later, the name Camille Harris was more than just legally changed. It was legendary in circles where she used to be invisible. Camille Moretti now sat as CFO of the newly formed Moretti Group, a structure she and Dante had reimagined together. She had streamlined operations, closed money drains, and converted ghost subsidiaries into real investments. But her proudest project wasn't the expansion into legitimate sectors, it was the scholarship fund. The Camille Initiative, designed to offer education and financial support to single mothers who wanted more than survival. Because desperation shouldn't be the only reason someone signs a contract, she'd told the board on launch day. Her office on the 30th floor overlooked the city she once walked on foot. Her desk held no ego-driven nameplate, just a photo of her daughter in ballet shoes, smiling like she had never known fear. Camille hadn't just stepped into a world of power, she had rewritten its rules. Dante remained who he was, respected, feared, untouchable, But those closest to him noticed the subtle changes. He still ran the organization with a firm hand, still made decisions that walked the line between justice and vengeance. But he also left work earlier. He smiled when Camille sent sarcastic texts. He even cancelled a meeting once just to attend a parent-teacher conference. When a lieutenant questioned if he was getting soft, Dante answered with one look, and the man never questioned again. Behind closed doors, however, Dante confessed things only Camille saw. His doubts, his regrets, his impossible hopes. And she listened. Not because it was her role, but because somewhere between fiction and fact, she had fallen in love with the man behind the name. Their home was filled with quiet rituals now. Evening espresso, late-night debates, and the occasional dance when the jazz station played their song. What started as a performance had become a partnership. Authentic, unbreakable. Still, Camille never forgot where she came from. Once every few weeks, she returned to the small diner where she once worked. The staff had changed, the booths were reupholstered, but the essence remained. She didn't sit in the corner or demand special treatment. She ordered coffee, paid in cash. Sometimes left $100 tips with a note for the next girl fighting for more. The owner tried to name a menu item after her once. She politely declined. "Let the story stay ours," she'd said. One evening, a new waitress approached her, eyes wide. "You look familiar," the girl said. Camille just smiled. "Probably just someone you used to be," she answered softly, standing to leave. The girl never forgot that. And so, Camille Moretti returned to that diner again one cloudy afternoon, not as a waitress, not as someone with something to prove, but as a woman who had turned a contract into a home. Not just a home built on gold and glass, but on grit, love, and choices she owned completely. Dante waited outside in the car, reading the day's reports, a ring on his finger that matched hers. She paused at the door, looking once more at the place where it all began. A false proposal, a desperate agreement, a silent, watching man with a job offer and secrets deeper than oceans. Now that man was her husband, her partner, and everything about their life was real. Camille stepped back into the world she once fought to survive, not because she had to, but because she'd earned the right to walk into it on her own terms. What did this story stir in your heart? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this video touched you, please consider subscribing to our channel and giving it a like. Stories like this take many days of care, writing, and heart to bring to life. And your support helps us keep going. From all of us here, thank you, and we'll see you in the next chapter.